Hi, I'm Jess Fields. Welcome to the show. It's late on Friday, May 22nd, as I record this, and I just interviewed James To Kun-sun. He is the most senior member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council and a major figure in the largest pro-democracy party in Hong Kong, called the Democratic Party of Hong Kong. He is a staunch critic of new security legislation that the National People's Congress of China just is now proposing. They only meet for 2 weeks every year, and they are taking steps to effectively begin dialing back all of the freedoms and liberties that are enjoyed by Hong Kong's residents, quite different than those enjoyed or not enjoyed by residents of China on the mainland. Hong Kong has had a special status under a one country, two systems structure since it was handed over to China from the British government. It was formerly a British colony for many, many years. That was in 1997. But of course, in recent years, numerous protests have broken out as China has tried to turn the screws on Hong Kong's independence and has attempted to exert greater and greater influence. Well, I got this interview with Mr. To, who is a senior figure in the pro-democracy movement and, as I said, the most senior member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. And it couldn't be more timely. He describes how China has been changing its tune on Hong Kong for over 2 decades since the handover from British authority to Chinese control. He describes how he is concerned for the future of freedoms for Hong Kongers and even how it affects him personally as he lives his life in what is increasingly becoming, as he calls it, a military state. Mr. To is unmincing in his descriptions of and criticisms of the changing system in Hong Kong and the way that China is exerting additional control. He also gives very clear direction in some respects and leaves things open in others for the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress and President Donald Trump on how to potentially deal with the Chinese Hong Kong situation. He provides some interesting advice to U.S. legislators on how to potentially treat Hong Kong as another Taiwan, as an important part of Sino-U.S. relations. This interview runs almost an hour, and if you have any interest in international relations, I am quite certain that you will find it to be very interesting. So, please get on with enjoying this interview with James To Kun-sun, senior member of Hong Kong's Legislative Council and a senior figure in Hong Kong's Democratic Party. Joining me now is James To Kun-sun. Mr. To is a legislative counselor and one of the most senior, in fact, the most senior members of the Hong Kong Legislative Council, serving since 1991, and a prominent member of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. Mr. To, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
If you could describe a little bit of your background for those who may be a little unfamiliar about your involvement in the Legislative Council getting elected, and you were elected before the handover from British authority to Chinese authority. So please explain a little bit about your background.
Okay. Well, I was first elected in Hong Kong Legislature in the British time, I would say, in 1991, when I was then 28. And continuously serving in the legislature even after the changeover until now. So I'm now 57 and continuously serve in the legislature for 29 years. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I, together with Martin Lee, founded the Democratic Party of Hong Kong in 1991.
So, Mr. To, would you please give our listeners a background on what things were like when you were first elected versus what they have been like since 1997, when China officially took some authority over Hong Kong from the British at that time?
Well, back in '97, China was not powerful as they are. So at that time, the idea of one country, two system come from the late Deng Xiaoping, the top Chinese leader, who died in '96. Well, he wanted to see Hong Kong to be peacefully united with the motherland, mainland China, and hope to use this model to attract Taiwan to also peacefully united with mainland China. So at that time, they asked for help from the international community to support this model. And the motto at that time was the party going on. The parties will go on. And the horse race continue, and the brothels continue, and the nightclub continue in Hong Kong. Of course, the stock market continues. So they feel just as usual, just the British flag down and the Chinese flag up, and everything as usual. The capitalist system should be preserved, and they promise us a high autonomy ruled by Hong Kong people, and will have independence of judiciary, and we'll have a elected legislature, although only part of the members are democratically elected. So at that time, the changeover is rather smooth, I would say. And in the first several years, Beijing just not to intervene. They just restrain themselves. And I can remember at that time the then Premier Zhu Yongji, who pronounced in their annual Beijing Working Report in the National People's Congress to say that when Beijing restrain ourselves not to interfere with Hong Kong, that is our success. That is the Premier Zhu Yongji proud to proclaim that. But that were the time when the very first few years after changeover. Well, I think the turning point a bit more is when the first time the Beijing want to push through a national security legislation in Hong Kong in 2003, then spark off everything. It sparked off a peaceful protest of 500,000 people coming out.
So 2003, Mr. To, so you're saying that this actually goes back about, from now, is about almost 20 years, and not long after the handover. I'd like to pause there just a little bit, though, to bring a little bit of perspective for those that may not be familiar, that Hong Kong, as you said, obviously China is well known as not exactly being a capitalist system, and China is run very much from the top down, as very authoritarian. Hong Kong, though, for many, many years has been consistently ranked at the top of indices of economic freedom, and so was quite a bit of a contrast to mainland China. So really what you're talking about is that Hong Kong functionally was run very much as a democracy, even right there at the edge of China. Is that fair to say, Mr. To?
Well, not exactly as a democracy, but as free as we can enjoy.
A free state.
A free state like that before the '97, in the very first few years after the changeover.
In the first few years.
Until 2003.
Until 2003. So then in 2003, what happened exactly? What started to change?
Well, we have enjoyed several years of peaceful times up to 2003. Then Beijing thought it's a good time to have a national security legislation in place in Hong Kong. But the consultation period is very short. They insist to push through in a several months' time, and leading to a big row, big uprise in Hong Kong, although at that time it was a very peaceful one. 500,000 Hong Kong people march out. It's the biggest assembly, biggest protest ever after 97, after the changeover. And eventually forced several legislators to pull out from the government's camp, not to support the proposed legislation. And the government lacked the majority to push through the bill, and they will withdraw the bill. The Beijing then reviewed the process, and their conclusion is that, first, Hong Kong people is not patriotic enough. How can Beijing push through a national security legislation but receive such a great protest? They fail to understand. So they draw the conclusion that Hong Kong people is brainwashed by the colonial government and intervened by foreign imperial power. So they begin to restrict our freedom and form a national team to think of a lot of a plan, a lot of steps to implement in order to, they would say, to gain the heart of the Hong Kong people and to begin to think of all the legislation, all the area of policy that can restrict our freedom.
So, Mr. To, what were the first steps to restrict freedom in Hong Kong, as you described them, starting in 2003, with mainland China starting to assert a little bit more authority over Hong Kongers?
First, they deployed, although in a covert manner, I will estimate tens of thousands of national security people coming to Hong Kong in all the position in a covert manner, and try to have a political civilians, and they increase their so-called united front tactics, and to form many organizations in order to infiltrate all the little and big organizations. Well, let's say they will divide it into different areas like sports. They will form different sport clubs and to give a free lesson to the resident, the neighborhood, and then to be friends with them. So eventually, when there are elections, they will support the establishment of pro-communist candidate. Let's say for the performance arts, they will have their own performance society. For the academics, they will put more mainland graduated or mainlanders graduated from US, UK, Europe to be put in the Hong Kong universities in order to gain more academic influence in those universities. They will form all those clansmanship association in order to grasp all the to play with the nationalism and national sentiments, so that to have these organizations, little and small, women's affairs organization. So they just infiltrate in all kind of social lives, form thousands and thousands of little organizations, which is controlled by communist members.
So then, starting really in about 2003, the mainland, the Communist Party started to infiltrate every aspect of Hong Kong society, as you say, forming other organizations, and so in a political sense, did this and I'm about to ask about the current situation with the new security legislation. But this is very interesting background, Mr. To. So in that period of time, then, let's say from 2003 to now, what was the shift in the attitude of average Hong Kongers and institutions based upon this infiltration from the mainland communists? Was this something that actually shifted the population more towards being pro-Beijing?
Yes, indeed. Especially when the climax is on the 2008 Beijing Olympic. This is the climax of popularity among Hong Kong people towards Beijing since the changeover. So the 2003 is the lowest point, and 2008 is the highest point of popularity in the heart of Hong Kong people towards Beijing. But after that, there is problem. When 2007, the first 10 years after the 10 handover, which is the first time that Hong Kong can have full democracy, universal suffrage, but Beijing turned us down. And so the sentiment began to change from the highest and the lower. And so the Hong Kong people struggle to fight for universal suffrage since 2007 and was consistently denied by Beijing every 4 years. So from 2014, there is a campaign called the Occupy Central Movement. That means a peaceful tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people determined to sit down on the CBD, Central District, Commercial District, and to frustrate the city so as to bargain for the Beijing to change their mind so that they will allow Hong Kong to have full democracy. But eventually, they do not budge. And Beijing just cleared the street, although in a half peaceful manner, but they are not using extreme violence. And starting from that start a tide of protests, a tide of increasingly big sentiments against Beijing.
Yes, yes. And Mr. To, so I suppose that is a perfect segue to where we are now. And I will read straight from a news story from May the 22nd. The story is China proposes strict national security law to combat political unrest in Hong Kong, from ABC News, which is when we are recording this interview, it is Friday in the U.S., although I know it's Saturday morning there in Hong Kong as we are recording this. And here is the lead from the story. A national security law introduced Friday at the opening session to China's National People's Congress to tackle the ongoing political unrest in Hong Kong would allow Beijing to send its security agents to operate freely in the former British colony to, quote, fulfill relevant duties to safeguard national security in accordance with the law. And then the third paragraph here says the proposed national security law, which Chinese authorities deemed an absolute necessity, quote, and is guaranteed to pass, is the latest and most far-reaching attempt by Beijing to tighten its grip on Hong Kong. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo here in the U.S. Wrote in a statement issued Friday morning that this was, quote, a death knell for the high degree of autonomy Beijing promised for Hong Kong. Mr. To, your response to all of this?
Well, first, maybe a bit of a background, because in our basic law, that is the mini constitution after the changeover, there is a provision saying that for national security legislation, Beijing will allow Hong Kong to legislate. Well, because Beijing has its own very draconian national security law, of course. But because this basic law want the whole world to think Hong Kong have the high degree of autonomy. So they allow us to enact the national security law on our own. What's meant by on our own is the timing is on our own and the content is on our own. Now, as you have understood that in 2003, they want to push the first draft of the national security law, but failed. So Beijing will say, oh, now it's 23 years after changeover. How can you not still have the national security law in place in Hong Kong? Especially, they feel that it is quite dangerous when last year, well, you know that when the Hong Kong people have well, we say quite violent, serious protests against the extradition bill, which allows Hong Kong authority to extradite person to China, to mainland China for trial. So that angers Hong Kong people, and that destroyed the confidence of Hong Kong people towards this one country, two system. So this time, Hong Kong people will say, you allow us to legislate, but you break your promise. So it is very serious breach of your promise. And it's not just a breach of promise to Hong Kong people, but to the whole world. Well, I remember when back in 2003, I fly to Washington to lobby for the support, the concern with the national security legislation. And I met the Deputy Secretary of State, Mr. Armitage. He's a big man. I remember he's a Navy person. Okay, and the U.S. consistently voice out that they feel any national security legislation must be consistent with the International Human Rights Covenant. Now the problem. If the Hong Kong legislature to legislate, of course, we must take into account the protection offered by the International Human Rights Covenant. But now, the proposal in 2020 is for Beijing to legislate for us. Beijing does not adhere, does not respect the International Human Rights Covenant. How can you have confidence with them to legislate for Hong Kong people and those living here? So that is a problem. And also, as you said, when they, in the decision, the national MPC decision, saying that mainland national security people can enforce the law in Hong Kong. This is the most difficult part for Hong Kong people to accept. You look at the national security people in mainland. Well, they don't have a good track record of respecting human rights. If they come to Hong Kong to enforce the law, I think that will ruin the reputation of Hong Kong. That will lose completely the confidence of international investors in Hong Kong. I quote you an example. Several months ago, when a merchant, I can't remember which exactly the private bank, okay, a merchant banker, a foreign merchant banker, just walked in the street of our CBD and happened to meet a group of Hong Kong police. There is a peaceful protest going on in Central. This merchant banker just say, I want to go back to my office just next door, but was scolded and treated very impolitely, and even to the brink of using a tear gas on him. What he has done is only to say, I am a merchant banker and I work in the next building. I want to go back. And those policemen say, there is a protest. Nobody can move. And you cannot go back to your office. Although he has done He hasn't done anything. Well, of course, he subsequently wrote a very long letter of protest to the police and to report to New York. But I think this is the current situation in Hong Kong. We are almost like a military state.
Almost like a military state now.
Why? Because the Beijing very much not to deploy the army, the PLA. So what they can rely on is the police. Usually, in this critical period, the police may just to stabilize the situation for 1 week, 2 weeks. But now the police, without deploying the PLA, the police has to stabilize the situation for almost 9 months. And they are all exhausted. And they become more violent. They become less restrained as before. When Hong Kong people give, half of Hong Kong people in a recent survey give 0 mark to the police. I think this is a catastrophe.
This is extraordinary, Mr. To. You are the most senior member of the Legislative Council and one of the most senior figures in the Democracy Party in Hong Kong. And you are saying that it doesn't sound like you're saying you can trust the police at all.
I can only say, cannot trust, I can say, I've lost almost half of my trust to the police.
Do you believe that the police in Hong Kong are controlled entirely now by the mainland Chinese communists?
I believe the mainland official have a direct command to the police. The problem is because the mainland don't want to deploy the PLA. Because if any one PLA going out of the camp and have an operation, I think that will be a very end picture of the one country, two system.
And you say PLA, please. PLA, you're talking about the armed forces.
The armed force, yes. The People's Liberation Army.
Right.
Just the very same like in the mainland. Okay. So they draw, I understand the top leader draw a line. We don't deploy the PLA, not to give the imperial power an excuse of saying that Hong Kong is a military state. But now the police behavior is almost 80% as an army.
So you're saying that even without deploying the armed forces, Beijing has been able to co-opt what is supposed to be an independent police force in Hong Kong, and that is why it is now essentially a military state in Hong Kong.
Yes. Well, I'll quote you an example. It's easy to understand. Like in your one of the big commercial mall, people just several hundred. And because we have the pandemic situation, so we have a quarantine order. Only 4 or 8 can group together. And between this group, we must have keep a distance. Okay, social distance. So every 4 or every 8. Totally several hundred people in a very big mall of about 4 to 5 story high in the main compound, main lobby. They just sing a song. And the police just brutally suppress, arrest, and to give you penalty ticket. And even to spray the tear gas to you. I think it's horrible. It's totally peaceful.
Mr. To, would you say that this is getting worse then? I mean, obviously, you know, it's a long arc. There's a long story here going back to 2003 and then even before that. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the suppression of dissent and opposing voices is getting worse by the moment, even without the security law.
Yes, because now the government is very weak. The popularity of the chief executive, that means the highest executive in the government, is only of single digit. I think currently it's 8%. And 80% of Hong Kong people want her to step down, to resign. But Beijing still want her to be the figurehead.
So the executive is Carrie Lam. Lam was at the National People's Congress and returned, and it seems that she is supportive of the new security legislation.
Yes, what can she do? Well, she must support. That's the problem. And I think the problem is that because the Hong Kong government is very weak and the popularity is very low, so they are very afraid of Hong Kong people. So afraid that even several tens of youth without tear gas bomb, without any full gear, just walk out in the main street and the high street and sing a song. The police has to disperse. That was not Hong Kong before. That was not Hong Kong 9 months ago. That was not Hong Kong 2 years ago. That was not Hong Kong throughout this changeover period. Only now, this several months, that we almost lost completely the freedom to assembly peacefully.
So, Counselor, going back to Secretary Mike Pompeo's comments that this is a death knell for Hong Kong's autonomy, some U.S. legislators, for example, Senator Tom Cotton and others, have expressed that the latest moves may require the United States to potentially revoke the special trade status that is given to Hong Kong, and that perhaps even other further sanctions would be necessary for China specifically to address this. So obviously there is a debate now within the United States about how to treat this issue. But if you were meeting with President Trump right now, if you could speak to him and ask him to do something, what would you tell the president? What would you tell the Congress and the American people that you would like to see the U.S. do about the Hong Kong situation, if anything?
Well, it's a difficult question. If Hong Kong lose the special trading status, that will be near the end of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong people will suffer very much. Well, the whole world suffer very much in this big epidemic situation. If Hong Kong does lose the trading status, of course, Hong Kong will be very horrible and worse situation. But on the other hand, we know that what Beijing still treasure Hong Kong is the international finance center status. So losing the special trading status will certainly hurt Hong Kong and also Beijing. I don't want to ask or teach President Trump what to do. But as a Hong Kong legislator, I can only say some of the Hong Kong people do want to have a so-called mutual elimination. Well, it's a special term coined up by Hong Kong youngsters. It's a two Chinese word called 南炒, Lam Chao, okay. It means mutual destruction, just like the IPCM, okay, at the time with the Russian Soviet Union, okay. That means let's start over from zero again, and to have mutually destroyed and eliminated together with Beijing and mainland China. Okay, that will be some of the sentiment of especially the younger generation, because they have nothing to lose. But it's quite divided in Hong Kong society. So I can only say Hong Kong needs concern, Hong Kong needs help from the international community, and we want the international community to express in very clear terms to Beijing that what you have promised to the world and Hong Kong people, you must honor. And this is not just one or two person, but consistently starting from the late Deng Xiaoping, and then Jiang Zemin, and then Wu Jintao, all the top leaders, they would say, we respect one country, two system. We want the whole world to speak in one voice that if China want people to believe in your system and at least your opening up of your reform, then you must at least let Hong Kong to have genuine autonomy and democracy, so that the whole world will believe that China will not go back to the old road of absolute totalitarianism.
So, in terms of the U.S. response, it sounds like you're saying actions against the trade status of Hong Kong would be the death knell. That potentially would be the death knell of Hong Kong.
Yes, to Hong Kong. But I don't know whether mainland China will be affected so serious that they will disintegrate. Because the top leaders, not Xi Jinping, but the vice president of China, Wang Qishan, I think he said in one of the international forum, I don't know whether it is Davos forum or not. He said, mainland Chinese people can tolerate much, much more than the American. We can go back to the old days to eat grass, grassland, okay, eat grass. But American cannot. So they feel that they can tolerate to a very extreme extent. I doubt very much. But actually, if they do want to go to the extreme, then that will fulfill the newly coined term of mutual destruction.
Do you think that mainland China and the Communist Party would be willing to put the mainland Chinese citizenry through the pain economically of losing Hong Kong's economic influence and financial status within the Chinese realm right now? I mean, of incurring, say, trade, even further trade issues with the United States?
Well, I must be very honest. Although I'm 30 years legislator in Hong Kong, a Chinese, but I'm not claiming to be an expert on mainland politics, because sometimes we want to just to be care of our own system, but sometimes we'll be involuntarily dragged into that politics. Honestly, I don't know whether now it's very complicated politics in mainland China. Whether, let's say, Xi Jinping has the only supreme power in the party, whether other so-called retired top leaders will have any say at all, and whether as a whole the Communist Party will have a check and balance, I honestly don't know. I believe there is a still power struggle going on. As the first day when the Communist Party was formed. Okay, because the power politics, power struggle within the party is a daily event. But I really don't know whether Xi Jinping can decide and to have the top and the only supreme power at all. But in any event, the world is more complicated as back in 30 years ago when, let's say, the Tiananmen massacre happened. The whole world have extreme sanction on China. But several years later, it seems that go back to normal and trading again, and the lobby for entering the WTO, and eventually allowed by the American president in order to engage them to have a peaceful change, transformation. I don't know what the world will react if mainland China insists that they will be one state against the whole world.
Mr. To, as you were speaking, one of your children peeked their heads from behind you, I think. Let me ask you a personal question, because China, Beijing in recent years has racked up a number of human rights violations of international concern. For example, in 2016, the lawyer Zhu Shifeng was sentenced to 7 years for, quote, subverting state power. And a democracy advocate Hu Shigen was jailed for 7.5 years for the same crime in 2017. Lawyer Zhang Tanyang was sentenced to 2 years in jail for inciting subversion of state power. Human rights activist Wu Gan was handed a jail term of 8 years for subverting state power. In 2019, Wang Quanzhang was sentenced to 4.5 years for subverting state power. And even Canadian citizens have been arrested in recent years as part of this idea that there's a subversion of state power. So obviously, some of the things that you are saying may not be even allowed if you were in mainland China. Do you fear for your security and for your family's security?
Well, honestly, I would have such fear. But the very first day when I joined the politics, back in 1991, I have the psychological preparation of facing all that. And maybe it's only a luck for 29 years that when I go to see the American president, Secretary of State, to see the Taiwan president or retired president, well, I was always branded as the subversive or even pro-independence guy advocating independence for Hong Kong, although I'm not. I always have a full-page criticism in the mainland, in the pro-communist newspaper in Hong Kong. I will keep all that as a symbol of honor. Okay, and I was consistently elected by Hong Kong Chinese to be a legislator representing them, and even the person enjoying the highest number of popularity and the highest number of vote ever in Hong Kong history. Well, I must serve Hong Kong people. I must care for little Samuel just next to me. He's 8. Okay. And I hope that we will not be, my family and I will not be forced into exile. But in the last 20 odd years, I was always teased by foreign dignitaries or foreign parliamentarians visiting Hong Kong. They say I'm in exile. Why? Because I don't have the right to enter mainland. My home return permit is not issued to me. So I was always, I can go to the world, but I cannot go to mainland.
So China does not allow you a permit to go into mainland China.
Yes, they don't allow me to go to mainland because they can still not forget that back in the Tiananmen Square massacre, when I was a little kid, together with some more senior politician to protest against them. And in 2003, the whole national security legislation protests are also provoked by me against the official in the chamber and anger the whole Hong Kong people. So that's why they can never forgive me.
Wow. So you protested at Tiananmen Square. You've been doing this for a long time.
No, in Hong Kong. Yes. After the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Right, but you protested in Hong Kong after Tiananmen Square. So you've been protesting, and you said the Chinese government, though, has not forgiven you for this. Do you believe that your communications are, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I think Americans would ask out of curiosity, because there is a general sense here of freedom of communication, of freedom to speak to one another without being monitored all the time, although there are security and privacy concerns, of course. but you are now technically part of China with Hong Kong, even with one country, two systems. Do you believe that all of your communications are monitored?
Certainly.
So do you believe that there is a member of the Communist Party watching this conversation or monitoring this right now?
Well, at least they will view your interview afterwards and mark down every word, especially whether I have advocated for independence of Hong Kong, mark down my sin list.
Wow. Wow. So when you go out in public, are you being tracked and followed?
Sometimes. I remember about 4 years ago, the Reuters, it's the Reuters who reported that I was closely monitored. And they have sources, independent, several sources from the Hong Kong police. At one time, I was followed by a car, and I report to the police, and the police arrest the one chasing me, but found no weapons, no guns, no weapons, and asked why you follow me, and they said out of interest. They are mainlanders.
So with all of the security concern that maybe you have for yourself, I mean, how can any international firm or financier feel comfortable operating out of Hong Kong at this time? It sounds like the situation would be very difficult for anyone that would expect, say, democratic institutions and a certain degree of freedom, because you're saying that that doesn't sound like it exists.
Well, from their angle, I think the concern would be on the freedom of information first. Because, well, you probably know that several important US newspaper correspondent in Beijing will be expelled after their permit is expired. And the Beijing said not only that they will be prohibited in Beijing reporting, but also in Hong Kong. So that means Hong Kong is losing the edge of being an information center. How can an investor, a big investor, a merchant banker handling billions of US dollar, not to have instant, correct, and precise information of what happened in Hong Kong? I think if we lose that edge, then, well, that is the status, our international financial center status will be seriously undermined.
So what does the future hold, Mr. To? Do you think there is any chance that this is going to resolve itself or improve in your perspective, that your actions, the actions of those in your party, as well as the other pro-democracy protesters and legislators that you serve with and work with, do you think that you have any chance of being successful, or do you foresee that this is going to get bad enough that, as you mentioned a moment ago, you might even actually be exiled from Hong Kong?
Speaking very honestly, the Hong Kong issue may be a matter of Sino-US relationship. Well, previously I would not say that, but now I dare to say it more honestly. Why? Because even a so-called just retired PLA general called Chow Liang wrote in an official magazine that even Taiwan is a matter of Sino-US relationship. In the past, they will only say Taiwan is a domestic matter. Of course, Hong Kong must be a domestic matter. But even a PLA general, very senior one, and once a very extreme hawk, now say Taiwan issue is a Sino-US relationship issue. So if Hong Kong is a US-China issue, then it depends on the relationship with the two countries.
So you're saying, Oh, well,
I,
if the U.S. government then were to prioritize Hong Kong as a piece of the China-U.S. relationship, as you are suggesting, as Taiwan is such a sticking point for the federal government of the United States in that relationship, you're saying that that would be so important that China could not ignore it, or is that what you're saying?
well, um, just depend on the important factors that the Beijing government will take into account. Well, in the past, we feel that almost 70% of the foreign income comes from Hong Kong to China. So that must be very important for mainland. But I don't know whether they will take this as the single most paramount factor of consideration. Because if our top leader in mainland feel that national pride is number one, national security is number one, number two, or going to the extreme, if China can go back 20 years and the enjoyment of average mainlanders can lower to half and go back to that not very good years, then they can ignore the world and to be at a direct crash with the whole world and with US.
So, Mr.
And
To,
Hong Kong will be a collateral damage in a sense.
yes. So, Mr. To, and then on that, as far as the amount of time that you think that Hong Kong has remaining a mostly free state, let's say, in the world, in the trading situation with many different countries having special status and so forth. If things do not change, if the U.S. does not intervene, if there is not a radical change in the situation in your favor, in the favor of pro-democracy legislators such as yourself, how long do you think it will be before Hong Kong is just another part of China?
Well, I can only conclude that Hong Kong is on the down road in terms of freedom, in terms of information, in terms of even your trust in the rule of law, in the trust of the independence of judiciary, all going down. It depends on the US, Sino-US relationship. It depends on maybe what one decision of our mainland leader in a critical situation. Everything can happen.
But time is running out, you're saying?
Almost. I give you a very amusing experience. Well, I will not deny many communist members will come to have a united front tactics on me, persuading me to change my stance and to just have a so-called dialogue with me. I remember the most recent dialogue when I said, my God, I'm a Christian, my God is higher and most powerful, more powerful than your Xi Jinping, your Li Keqiang, your premier, and the total of Communist Party. I believe so. And he said, before departing, he said, then if you believe your God is so powerful, you must pray more for China and Hong Kong. A communist member,
wow,
not believing in God, asking me to pray more to God.
Wow. Well, since you bring up religion, talk a little bit about how religion is impacted by all of this. Do you fear, obviously, freedom of religion is really non-existent in mainland China. Do you fear that freedom of religion in Hong Kong is going to also become non-existent in the coming years?
On religious freedom, so far okay. But just on the recent week, the pro-communist newspaper and magazine is beginning to attack religious organizations, especially Christian organizations, churches in Hong Kong. They said they are closely associated with foreign imperialist power. And they have also been a factor for the instability of Hong Kong. It's only 1 week ago, they started to attack all the teachers and all the Christian organizations. They said the Hong Kong teachers as a whole just brainwash our youth to be anti-China. So they must use extreme measure to tackle the teachers as a whole.
So what do you have to say about how the Vatican, the Catholic Church, has treated China in recent years? Cardinal Joseph Zen, the retired bishop of Hong Kong, expressed concern recently that perhaps the Catholic Church is not taking a hard enough stand on mainland Chinese authoritarianism with regards to religion. And he said in one quote from February 19th of this year, he said, quote, "A totalitarian regime doesn't compromise. They want complete surrender." Cardinal Joseph Zen, what do you have to say about that? Is there more that maybe the Catholic Church and other religious institutions can do in this situation? Or has there been, in your view, too much compromise?
Well, of course, the Catholic Church can do more in Hong Kong to voice out. And they do voice out in critical times in the last several years. Well, but the reality is that, Vatican is negotiating with Beijing for a formal treaty, the formal relationship. And so that's why even retired Cardinal Sin was a bit sidelined and not as influential in Vatican as before. That's the hard reality. But I will say after these several months turmoil in Hong Kong and what Chinese government done for the whole world, maybe the Vatican will change a bit of their stand and become a little bit tougher towards the Chinese government.
So as a pro-democracy legislator and a Christian yourself, you're saying you would like for the Vatican to take a harder stand on Beijing?
Well, the Vatican is an organization of faith. And what they believe is right. They have I would say, a God's command to say it is right. If it is wrong, it is evil, they are ordered by God to say it is wrong. I think this is a fundamental doctrine. It's not you or me. It's their formal ethical standard that they should impose on themselves by the Bible. So that's why people will appoint the priest, the bishop, the top religious leaders to speak the truth and what is right from wrong.
Mr. To, you've been very generous with your time. As we draw down the interview, is there anything that you would like to express or say to Americans, in particular, the primary audience for this, although really for anyone outside of Hong Kong who wants to understand what's going on and what you would want to say to them?
Well, I will appeal to the whole world, especially Americans, to care for Hong Kong, not just as an international financial center, but as a group of people who very much insist that we should enjoy the freedom as promised by the Chinese government. It's a solemn promise that the Chinese government had made when they appeal for the whole world to support this model of one country, two system. Do care for Hong Kong and speed up for Hong Kong. That's what I want to appeal to the world.
James To Kun-sun, the most senior member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong and senior member in the Democracy Party of Hong Kong. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And that was James To Kun-sun, senior member of Hong Kong's Legislative Council and a major figure in the Hong Kong Democratic Party. If you enjoy these interviews, please subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. And I want to thank those of you who have helped the podcast to grow so rapidly. And we're gaining new listeners every single day and getting some really good interviews that you won't find anywhere else. So I really appreciate you for sharing this with your friends and family members, and please continue to spread the word. And if you have an idea for a guest, by the way, or would like to be one, email me at jessfieldsshow@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.